Okay, welcome back to part 2 of De Bello Gallico, Book 1, Chapter 1. Um, Again, the videos will get shorter, I promise. So, let's get right back to it. Now Caesar's going to give us a little bit about the character of some of these, or characteristics rather, of some of these different peoples of Gaul. And let's get into the first little bit here. Horum omnium fortissimi sunt Belgae, propteria quod accultu atque humanitate provinciae longissime absunt, minimeque ad eos mercatore saepe comeant, atque ea quae ad effeminandos animos pertinent important. Let's try that one more time. Horum omnium fortissimi sunt Belgae, propteria quod accultu atque humanitate provinciae longissime absunt, minimeque ad eos mercatore saepe comeant, atque ea quae ad effeminandos animos pertinent important. Well, let's start with clauses. What do we see? You guys see the word quod here. That's going to start a clause, and actually we have to back it up a little bit to propteria quod, which means especially because. I'll just go ahead and give you that little hint here. And so do we see any other clauses? We don't know exactly where that ends. We could probably assume that it ends at absunt, and perhaps it does. Now you see that there's another clause right here that starts with quae, and really we need to take that to a verb, and we have pertinent. So I think we could probably stop that clause there. Now, just to kind of tell you, I don't know if there's any way you could figure this out unless you actually started translating the entire sentence. I think that probably the entire propteria quod to the end of the sentence at important, I think all of that really is sort of one big clause. It explains what's going on in the first few words. But before we get there, let's do prepositional phrases. Do we see any here? And the answer is no. But we do see accultu atque humanitate. We see ad eos. And we see ad effeminandos animos. Okay, now let's go to verbs. What verbs do we see? Well, horum omnium fortissimi sunt. We see sunt, which sunt is it's the main verb of the entire sentence. In the huge clause, we do have several other verbs, though. We have absunt right here. And then moving along a little bit further, we have comeant. And then we also have important. And then the clause within the clause, which starts with quae, we see a verb here, pertinent. So now let's try looking at subjects. What's the subject of sunt? We know it's the main verb. It looks like it's going to be Belgae. Is there another nominative word that's describing Belgae? That would be fortissimi. Inside of this clause, do we see any words that look nominative? And the answer is no, up to absunt. But after absunt, it looks like mercatores could be nominative. And I think that's about it. Let's see, anything else that we can mark here? Horum and omnium. Aurum is plural. It's possessive. Those are possessive. Provinciae here is also possessive. That's a genitive word. Some of the words, I don't really mark, like longissime, which is an adverb, and as is minime and saepe. And of course, atque, meaning and, that's a conjunction. Typically, I don't really mark those. Now, what's ea doing here? That's kind of a weird word. It comes from is ea id, which is the personal pronoun. And so ea could be nominative feminine singular, but that doesn't really make sense. because if you look at this verb important, that's definitely plural. So ea can also be neuter nominative plural or neuter accusative plural, because each and every day neuter plurals end in a. And we'll have to figure out, I think we're going to have to actually translate the sentence to figure out, is ea here nominative or accusative? Okay, well, let's get right to it. So, horum omnium, of all of these, meaning of the Belgae, the Galli, and the Aquitani, of all of these, the fortissimi, the bravest or strongest, are the Belgae. Especially because, and our subject is still the Belgae here, they are away, or very far away, from the culture and the civilization or the refinement of the province. Notice how province, at least in this text, has a capital P. Provincii does, rather. What is the province? Well, before Caesar actually goes into Gaul, into what we now know as Gaul, like the Roman province of Gaul, before he did that, the Roman province of Gaul was actually just this tiny, tiny, tiny little strip that ran along the coast of the Mediterranean in the very south of France, and it just sort of connected northern Italy with eastern Spain, and it was a very tiny little strip. So the Belgae are the strongest, especially because they are the farthest away, essentially, from the culture or refinement and civilization of the province. And the reason why I included all this in the clause is because, again, it's sort of explaining why the Belgae are the bravest. And merchants, minime saipe, not very often go back and forth to them, and you kind of have to supply minime saipe again, and not very often do the, and I think the subject here is merchants, do the merchants bring in ea, things which pertain to the weakening of the spirit. Wow. Okay. So ea there is going to be, I think, a direct object here. So, once again, I know that was kind of a lot there. Of all of these, the Belgae are the bravest, especially because they are very far away, or the farthest away, from the refinement and civilization of the province. And merchants not very often go back and forth to them, like visit them, and carry or import things which pertain to weakening their spirits or souls. I suppose you could make an argument that the subject of important is the Belgae again, so it kind of the subject might go Belgae for absunt, mercatores for comeant, and then Belgae for important. But I think you could also make an argument that mercatores is the subject of important as well, which is the way I took it. Merchants don't come visit them, and the merchants also don't really bring in things which pertain to the weakening of their spirits. So there you go. I guess in Caesar's mind, even though he, of course, belongs to civilization and refinement, I guess he is sort of making a commentary that really that kind of brings about a softening of you, I suppose, as a person, and maybe that's not necessarily a good thing for Caesar, or maybe he's just stating what he feels like is an inevitable fact of human existence. Who knows? We will talk about that later. Okay, so that was a tough sentence. This next one's a little bit easier. Proximique sunt Germanis, qui trans renum incolunt, quibuscum continenter bellum gerunt. Proximique sunt Germanis, qui trans renum incolunt, quibuscum continenter bellum gerunt. So first of all, any clauses here? You probably found that there are a couple. There's one that starts here with qui and goes to incolunt. And then quibuscum, or cum quibus, like with whom, and it ends at gerunt. Prepositional phrases. I see one. Trans renum. All right, moving on. Let's look at verbs. Let's find those. Well, in the main independent thought of this sentence, it's only these three words. One of them is a verb, sunt. In the first clause, the verb would be incolunt, and in the second clause, the verb would be gerunt. Who do you think the subject of sunt is? Well, let's go back. Who's the subject of the first part of this independent thought in the previous sentence? It's the Belgae. So they are the subject of sunt. So the Belgae, and, there's the quay there, and they are proximi, the closest to whom? To the Germans. So, and the Belgae are the closest to the Germans. The Germans, qui, so that's the antecedent there of qui would be Germanis. The Germans who live across the Rhine, with whom they continually gerunt bellum. We know that that means wage war. We've had that idiom quite a lot. They wage war. So, and the Belgae are the closest to the Germans who live across the Rhine, with whom they continually wage war or fight in battle. So you're going to see this crop up quite a bit in Caesar's writings. He thinks that a lot of these Gallic tribes are fierce and pretty awesome, like the Belgae. But in Caesar's mind, and this is the case, I think, for most of the Romans of his day, the Germans were like the scariest people ever. And they were much, much fiercer than anybody else that the Romans encountered, which is probably why the Romans never really did that well against the Germans. So hey, the Belgae are already pretty awesome because they're so far away from, the civilization of the Roman province of Gaul, and merchants don't really come back and forth to them, and they don't bring in things which are going to weaken their souls. And let me just add that they're also the closest to the Germans. Oh man, and the Germans are just insane. Now, Caesar is going to introduce a new group of people here, and you're going to see it right here, Helvetii, and you might think to yourself, wait a minute, I thought we were talking about the Belgae, the Galli, and the Aquitani, right? Okay. Now we're going to take a look at, he's talked about the Belgae. Now we're going to take a quick look at the Galli, and Caesar's going to mention one particular tribe of people under the larger umbrella of the Galli. Doesn't really say much about the Aquitani. He kind of ends up conquering them pretty quickly. I guess he doesn't really think that much of them. But anyway, so let's take a look at this next sentence. And it's got a few clauses in it, as we will see. Qua de causa Helvetii quoque reliquos Gallus virtute praecedunt, quod fere quotidianis proliis cum Germanis contendunt, cum aut suis fenibus eos prohibent, aut ipsi in eodum fenibus bellum gerunt. Qua de causa Helvetii quoque reliquos Gallus virtute praecedunt, quod fere quotidianis proliis cum Germanis contendunt, cum aut suis fenibus eos prohibent, aut ipsi in eodum fenibus bellum gerunt. So let's start with clauses. Do we see any? You probably saw that one starts right here at quod, and it's going to end at contendunt. And there's another one here that starts with cum, and it's going to end down here at gerunt. Prepositional phrases. You see de causa. Notice how the causa, of course, is ablative. Look back one word, qua de causa. So really all three of these words are the prepositional phrase. This is an idiom in Latin that means for this reason. It literally means concerning which reason. And let's just say for this reason. That's totally fine, and the AP board will accept that as an accurate translation, for this reason. Any other prepositional phrases do we see? we actually have one cum Germanis, with the Germans. And I think there's one more in. Now, I know that we're tempted to put aorum in the prepositional phrase. It technically belongs outside of it because aorum, arum, orum, is plural. That's genitive plural. And in is always followed by either an accusative or an ablative noun. Where is that? That would be right here, finibus. Now let's take a look at subjects. What do we have in terms of nominative in the main independent thought of the sentence from qua to praecadunt? I'm sorry, we should identify verbs. Let's do that first, that's easier. Praecadunt would be a verb. Inside the quod clause, you've got contendunt. And inside the circumstantial clause, we have prohibent and gerunt. Now let's take a look at nominative subjects. The subject of praecadunt would be helvetii. And I don't really see any other words that look nominative, except once we get down here into this circumstantial clause, ipsi, they themselves. That's a nominative word right there. How about direct objects? Accusatives that could be direct objects. Well, reliquos gallos. And then if we keep going, we have eos and bellum. Now there's some other words in here that we haven't accounted for that look perhaps like, look at virtute. Where do you see the E ending in Latin? Of course, that would be the last case is the ablative. AOE is the sibus. Virtute is ablative. Notice again, no preposition in front of it, so we're going to have to add in by, with, from, in, or on. Oh, proliis and quotidianis, those are both ablative words. Fere is an adverb, so we're going to have to add in by, with, from, and on. And then down here we have suis, finibus. Going to have to once again add in by, with, from, in, or on. So let's get right to it. So we're talking about the Belgae and how awesome they are, especially because, hey, you know, they're right next to the Germans, and the Germans are like the baddest people ever. For this reason, meaning the same deal, like proximity to the Germans, for this reason, the Helvetians, or the Helvetii, also excel or surpass the remaining Gauls in courage. Please never translate virtute as virtue, because they will count it off. It does not mean virtue. That is a much, much later definition of that word. Well after the time of the Aeneid and De Bello Gallico. So for this reason, the Helvetians also surpass the remaining Gauls in courage. Because, and now Caesar's going to tell us why, because they contendunt, they fight with whom? With the Germans, in what? In nearly, that's very, in nearly everyday battles. Cum, when, and then you have out, which means either or. When they, and I guess that means here the Helvetians, because we haven't seen a change in subject, when they either stop them or check them, stop them at their own borders, or prevent them from their own borders, meaning when the Helvetians prevent the Germans from coming into Helvetian territory, or when they themselves, again meaning the Helvetians, wage war in the borders of them, meaning when the Helvetians go over into German territory and attack. So I know that was a little bit confusing. Let's do that one more time. So for this reason, the Helvetians also excel or surpass the remaining Gauls in courage, because they, meaning the Helvetians, they fight with the Germans in nearly everyday battles, when either they prevent or stop them, prevent them from their borders, or they themselves wage war in the borders of them, meaning the Germans. Okay, so the rest of the chapter, part 3, as you'll see, is really more of just strictly a geography lesson. But hey, a little bit of info about the Belgae. And why does he mention the Helvetii in particular? Well, because there's a conspiracy that's going to crop up among the Helvetii, which he'll start talking about in chapter in chapter 2. And that conspiracy is actually what gets Caesar involved in internal Gallic politics, which then gets him further and further and further into the territory of Gaul, and he just keeps going and getting further involved in local disputes, and before he knows it, he turns around and he's conquered most of it. So there you go. See ya.